we're talking about state of digital securities, but we're gonna hopefully make it a little bit more interesting than to say that it is the future, but we need to, get over some obstacles. First things first, we've got some really great panelists. I'm not just saying that, I actually know them. And they are all doing very interesting things in the space. Some of them I'm fanboys of, some of them I'm not, but that's okay. So let me let them introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Mason.
Yeah, I'm Mason. I'm CEO of TokenSoft. We help issuers comply with their applicable regulations when they're going through the issuance process and when they have their tokens out there in the world moving around.
David Weild. I run an investment bank that we're pushing out to the cloud, and we've got 70 bankers. We started in 2016, getting people to effectively collaborate online. We do blockchain private placements and the like, and I'm an advisor to Templum, board member of INX, which is an Israeli company that's on file with the SEC, and with a Chinese company called 55 that are all in the business of making markets. I have some notoriety. I was vice chairman of NASDAQ, ran listings businesses globally at the time when Steve Jobs was still alive, and then people call me the father of the Jobs Act.
Hi, I'm Ami Ben David. I'm co-founder, managing partner of Spice VC. We were one of the very first funds to tokenize itself with security tokens. And then we doubled down by deciding to invest all of our money into security token infrastructure and ecosystem. So we're investors in company like Securities, INX that you just mentioned is a portfolio company. I'm working on another project for security token called Onera, which is a base layer blockchain for security tokens. So I said the word security tokens like 7 times in one sentence, so that's what I'm about.
Okay, hi, I'm Lou Kerner, and I'm with Crypto Oracle, and we help build, grow, and engage decentralized communities. We do that for ourselves. We have 11 different communities, the largest of which is Crypto Mondays, which is now in 51 cities, largest crypto meetup in the world. And we've also done a lot of work, community work in security tokens, including the security token meetups, which are in Los Angeles, New York, and Tel Aviv. We partnered on the Security Token Summit at the last Crypto Invest Summit, which was terrific, and excited to be on the panel.
Yep. My name is Jor Law. I am a former corporate and securities attorney, now just kind of a student of the space and an advisor to a few companies, including T0, Polymath, Verify Investor, and Prime Trust. All right, let's talk about deal flow. This is kind of an important topic. Everyone, when people think about state of the industry, of course they're going to think about deal flow. David, you're the investment banker here. What are you seeing as deal flow? What's changing? What's coming in? What looks interesting? What's changed?
Well, I think we went from what Alan Greenspan used to call during the internet period, that irrational exuberance where people threw caution to the wind, ignored securities regulation, wishful thinking. Now we are all understanding that most of what's getting done is securities offerings, and people are trying to effectively understand how to do that. It's much more buttoned down. Most of the deals that are getting done are actually financings that are done through traditional securities placements, not through tokenization yet. And so I think that's where we will. You're looking at things with a much more sort of venture capital lens on things, much more dyed in the wool. People are not, much more buttoned down. People are not just throwing money at stuff any longer.
Right. And then Lou, you're kind of master of communities in the space. What are you hearing from the community? What are you hearing from kind of the entrepreneurs that are in the space that are looking to do tokenized offerings? What are you hearing from investors in the space?
Sure. So there's undoubtedly a tremendous interest, I think, globally in the security tokens and accessing markets, accessing capital, and having a global investor base. So there's tremendous interest on that side. On the investor side, I think there's also a lot of interest, particularly interest in blockchain and crypto companies is growing. But as others on the panel can speak of, there's still lots of challenges for lots of people getting into security tokens and investing and how they work. And so we're in the early days of security tokens, but we're huge believers.
Right. And Ami, you've kind of, in working with Onera, you've been talking to, ecosystem players. What's the sense? Are you seeing any kind of newfound interest or interest from new players in the space, institutionals perhaps? What are you seeing in the market?
Absolutely. I think the market is shifting. We started security tokens, even us when we started our fund, we thought there will be a retail play, crowdfunding. We realized pretty quickly that crowdfunding was what fueled maybe ICOs, but it's not really initially suitable for the type of assets that can be tokenized. These are more boring assets.
Right.
Equity, debt, real estate, things like that. They're not really perfect for, at least initially, for crowdfunding. But on the other hand, the big capital in those trillions of dollars worth of asset classes are being done by institutional investors. So definitely institutional investors is where the focus is right now. I'm talking to bankers, investment bankers all the time. There's definitely an understanding there that private equities, private securities are going digital. It's just a question of how and when.
Yep. No, I would agree with that. At T0, same thing. We're getting quality companies like Citibank or Oppenheimer. These types of companies are coming in, expressing a lot of interest in the space. And if you've looked at the dollar amounts invested into tokenization and securities specifically, it's like more than $500 million. So, when every major Wall Street, participant is looking into the space, investing into the space, researching the space, that's very promising for what will develop afterward. Mason, I want to come back to you. You're, I know you really well, and I know you do a ton in this space. There's deals, and then there's quality deals, right? So what do you think as an industry we can do to kind of improve the quality of the deals that are going through? Is that even up to us? Is that not up to us? What are you seeing? Are you seeing slightly better quality things come to you, than kind of in the past, perhaps?
Yeah, so we're more on the infrastructure side, and in terms of, I guess, quality, we are seeing more of a shift towards more institutional players that are looking at experimenting in the space, trying to see what's out there. But I think in terms of what we can do for the space in general, it's really about just making sure that the infrastructure is there when these different types of issuers do come to the table, whether it's smaller startups like it was primarily when we started, or larger institutionals like it is more so now. I think it's really important to continue to build the infrastructure so when these people come, there are services out there that they can use to issue their assets, onto the blockchain, into the markets.
Yeah. David, father of the Jobs Act, also an investment banker, you've been in old world and new world. The tokenization space has elements of crowdfunding, Jobs Act, kind of retail investors. It also has elements, obviously, of kind of the old world of institutionals. Where do you see the balance in the future, in a few years, and how do you think we'll get there? Or, how do you see that space evolving?
Well, it's a good question, Jor. I mean, I think that there are things that tokens will do better than traditional securities, and there are things that traditional securities and the infrastructure out there will frankly do better than tokens. And I think that people engage in a lot of wishful thinking and really don't understand or don't mind that, for instance, if you're dealing with small cap stocks, you do that issuance via tokens, they're not going to trade well because you're missing a lot of the support infrastructure that would support a straight stock. It doesn't mean that just because it's a token, it's going to trade miraculously better. So when you look at periodicity, for instance, of distributions, that's something that can probably be handled much more efficiently with a token long term, and it'll go right into somebody's cyber wallet. So I've talked to guys that are actually thinking that they can do distributions every 12.5 seconds or something ridiculous like that, right into your cyber wallet, and so there's a range of securities that I think it will apply to. But right now, I mean, one of the things that people need to understand or should understand as a banker who tries to get deals done, that there's a large part of the market that is not enabled to purchase tokens, right? And if I'm representing an issuer and I want to get a deal done, I want to maximize the distribution. So I want to be as qualified as I reasonably can be. And so if I get ultimately to public markets, it's impossible right now to avoid a NASDAQ or a New York Stock Exchange listing, because that confers as a national exchange under the 34 Act or 33 Act, whichever one it is. It gives you a state blue sky exemption. And that means that in the aftermarket, people can solicit trades. So, right now we have this whole war going on, this discussion about what's going on with custody. So a lot of the institutions and family offices aren't yet playing in this space. And so for those that are providing, platforms and infrastructure and tokenization strategies, one of the things I would encourage people to do is to give me the best of both worlds. I want to be able to give an investor a token if they want the token for a lot of these offers. I want to be able to give them a security.
Right.
And then ultimately, don't cause me to get boxed in as an investor. Give me an exchange feature so that if I want to swap out of the stock, I can get a token and vice versa, because that will allow me to access 100% of the investor base.
Right.
And right now, the problem with tokenization is actually today still a very small percentage of the total addressable investor market, and a lot of the people that are looking at things on the basis of fundamentals that might want to play, might want to invest, are still hesitant to commit themselves to a token.
Right. So you've distinguished kind of something that, hopefully in the future there's no kind of differentiation between, but you've distinguished between kind of tokenization and securities. Now I kind of want to go down the line, because I don't think I've ever asked you guys this, but what do you guys think? Do all securities become tokenized as a matter of just technology in the future, or no?
So I think it's definitely important to address that we're literally building the existing financial markets on the blockchain, and the same infrastructure needs to exist. All the same pieces need to exist. Like it was mentioned earlier, there's certain things that traditional markets just simply can do better, and certain benefits that will come out from rebuilding all this stuff on the blockchain. And the two primary paradigm shifts that we see at TokenSoft enabled by rebuilding this on the blockchain are, number one, these securities now have the ability to settle 24/7. The blockchain never turns off, and that's something that's just exists by virtue of building on top of a blockchain. The second thing that we've sort of noticed is, so when we service certain clients, we help them comply with securities laws in the jurisdictions in which they're offering. So our largest client, we're helping to do that in 56 countries. And so the other thing that we're noticing is just the level of automation that we're bringing in terms of compliance is very fascinating, and really enables better liquidity as these tokens transfer from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I think that's where the real benefits lie. And is it better than the existing markets? We don't know yet. But we really do believe that those two features will enable things that do offer viable trade-offs versus traditional markets in the future.
Right. So notwithstanding all of that, yes or no? Do you think all securities will be tokenized or not?
Maybe.
Yeah. All right, David?
Yeah, I think everything that is a security will have a tokenized option at some point.
I think there's a law of nature that says that if some information is analog and a digital option appears, everything will go digital. And there's no going back. Whatever goes digital never goes back to being analog. And once it goes digital, everything changes. The business model changes, because it's much more fluid. It's like music. It started as analog. You had your vinyl records, and then it became a little bit digital by CDs, but it's the same thing. But then you have Spotify.
Yeah, but vinyl is
never
back.
goes.
Vinyl is back now.
Like a
A little bit.
percentage of the market.
Lou, how about you?
There's Roy Amara was a professor at Stanford in the 70s when he coined Amara's law, which is the fact that the impact of all great technology is overestimated in the short run and underestimated in the long run. We're 25 years after Amazon started selling books online, and last quarter, online sales were 10% of total retail sales. So, and that's after 25 years. I think if in 25 years this market is as big is 10% of the total securities market, I think that would be a huge win for the security tokens market. And what I'm most excited about in terms of security tokens is, today I really think that we are, the analogy I use is that the very first TV shows was somebody sitting at a desk with a microphone going, now we're on television, right? They were just doing radio on television because that was all they knew. And so right now, everything that's going on with security tokens, I really feel we're just taking old securities and we're putting them on the blockchain, and that's great and exciting. But the really exciting thing is what we're going to be able to do with all of these new technologies, what securities can be, and the work that guys like Mason at TokenSoft is doing and putting in all that intelligence into securities. It's really limitless what securities can be.
Yeah, just because it's a security token, digital securities panel, we have to touch on enforcement a little bit. David, what's your feeling of the enforcement trend, that leads us to the state that we are today? Are you generally positive with kind of how enforcement has kind of trended? Are you a little bit negative? Do you hope for more?
I think the SEC's had a remarkably light touch on it. I mean, if you look at the kind of the major, if you will, illegal securities offerings that were done as ICOs, they went to them and they fined them only $250,000, and then they asked them to do a rescission offering. I mean, but there wasn't some kind of broad scale witch hunt, crucifixion. There were a lot of subpoenas that went out, and I think part of that was that there was a lot of bad legal advice that was dispensed, and I think some of the law firms were on the receiving end of it. The classic, you rationalize your way to the conclusion that you want to reach, or said another way, you engineer your way as an attorney to the conclusion that because your customers are looking for that answer, and you try and provide it to them, and I think that turned out to be really bad advice. But I was actually in SEC Chair Clayton's office at the end of September, and I've mentioned this before, but I mean, one of the things that people don't understand about Chair Clayton is that the man is a brilliant capital markets lawyer. I ran equity capital markets at a top 10 firm, priced 1,000 public equity offerings, and he was talking about my job the way I did it. He had an uncanny insight about how we ran the institutional book, brought in aftermarket orders. This is a very sophisticated person on these issues. He also has an engineering background, degree. So, having known SEC chairs going all the way back to Arthur Levitt in the 90s, this is the first guy that has this deep a background on these issues who's at the helm of the SEC. So I think we're very lucky. We're going to end up with some very interesting. He's not a Luddite. I mean, he's said in his speeches that we want to embrace new technologies and so on and so forth. But I think that we have the largest, deepest, cleanest, most transparent pool of assets, tradable assets in the world, in the United States. And that, for us to be the first mover sometimes isn't the right choice, because we don't want to poison the well of goodwill that we've developed. And I think that if we get in there methodically, in good time, deliberately, I think we'll own the market. I really do think the United States will own this market. There's no place out. The rest of the world beats a path to our door trying to invest here. So I'm optimistic. But if my interactions recently, like with INX, going through the SECs, they're being very deliberate because they don't want to make mistakes. They're doing things that are very predictable. The SEC does not want to assert jurisdiction over things that are not securities, right? Yep. And so they're asking people to kind of present, because you can trade a token as a currency, you can trade a token as a security. I mean, there can be security tokens forwards, and so bucketing these things in a way that appeals to the end regulator and is going to be important. So they're actually acting in a very, I think, deliberate, predictable manner, but it's a little slow for people's taste. It's not dissimilar. I hate to say it, but you go back, and I know, Lou, you were an internet analyst back in the heyday, and there's a whole slew of early entrants that are no longer there, and it was sort of the next wave that sort of watched the mistakes that developed. It mostly emerged from the primordial ooze to kind of populate the Amazons of the world, not first mover, eBay, not a first mover, right? So wouldn't surprise me to find that that we see a similar thing in the block space.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship. Sometimes I think they're just absolutely obtuse, but for the most part, I do agree that they've done a very good job, and I think it's better that they learn and make good judgments and decisions rather than kind of react and kind of go get it wrong. Um, you know, we focus on the U.S. a lot, obviously because we're here, but the reality of tokenization is that it is a global, or it has the capability of being global. So for anyone that feels that they can comment on this, what trends are you seeing internationally, from enforcement or from kind of adoption of tokenization, deals actually getting done? What are you guys seeing?
We launched our token internationally from day one. So I had to go through a lot of lawyers in each country and try to match software to what they were doing. And what I'm seeing is that the US is by far the least clear jurisdiction to work at. It would be really nice if just a simple, plain English document would come out of the SEC or any other entity that will tell me what needs to be done in a way that I don't have to get 3 answers that are different from 3 different lawyers to every question that I ask, and I have to judge which one of the lawyers is right or not. And they're all thinking that they're saying the right thing because there's not enough clarity here. While outside the US, it's actually a lot easier. Countries like France adopted native ledger, and in the UK, there's a very clear definition of what they're going to do. Switzerland did something that are very clear as well. I think that what's missing here is clarity, and rather than changes. And I think that if clarity came out, it would make things a lot easier for everybody, because the regulations themselves, once you understand them, and I spend the time to understand them, you can work with them. And you can just build the software to work with them, and you can be compliant. Not only compliant, you can be enforcing them in software. I mean, if the SEC looked into the future, they could be potentially in a situation where they could have coders on staff and have the code actually enforce the regulation rather than having to do it manually.
Yep.
They could do that with this technology, and that's what they should embrace.
So I assume you're talking about SPICE, when you said about, for most of the, okay.
Spice and Securities later.
So let me ask you though, like, what wasn't clear about that? I mean, you knew you were securities. The laws that affect securities affected you as they've affected other, every other, venture capital fund. What wasn't clear?
Every question that we ask, I'll ask you a simple question. After a year in the US, Reg D for a fund, how many people can buy the token after 1 year is finished? How many people can buy the token, and how many people can trade the token? Okay, and then you're starting to get into very, very complicated answer to this simple question. And some lawyer will say, no, you have to stay with only 99. And if somebody sells, they have to sell everything. And others will say, no, you can sell to much more. You can sell to 150, not 150, 1,000, 2,000. You'll ask 3 lawyers, you'll get 3 questions to a simple question like that.
So anyone launching a fund, remember to ask your lawyers those questions. Lou?
Yeah, in my view, the regulators have 2 choices. They can roll out the red carpet, or they can roll out the red tape. And they roll out the red tape at their own peril, because the genie's out of the bottle. This is happening. And it's going to happen whether the United States passes accommodating laws or not. And I'm a huge fan of David's. He has massive experience. But I think the sea change that is coming along now, and the way that the U.S. is approaching it, I think puts our financial markets and their domination at risk, because other countries like France, like Malta, like Gibraltar, like Switzerland, like Singapore, and we can go on and on and on, and other countries around the world whose regulatory environments are much friendlier than ours. And people are moving there. People are leaving the United States, and people are moving there. And the truth is, nobody even knows what the SEC is solving for. right? What is the SEC trying to do? Nobody even knows what the answer to that is. Are they actually trying to protect investors? Is that the main thing that they're trying to do? Our government says that, and then we say, you can't buy this stock if you're not an accredited investor, but you can go buy a lottery ticket. So, I think what we're doing in the United States, puts a lot of things at risk for us.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on with the international. So one is the regulatory side of things. The regulators just getting comfortable with how they want to approach it. And the first guidance that we saw was with the SEC sort of late summer of 2017. Singapore passed some additional guidance for these blockchain-based issuances in late 2017. Then it was February 2018, Switzerland's FINMA came out and passed some fairly clear guidance as to how they wanted all these tokens treated in the various cases. And so part of it is just the regulators just getting comfortable with passing guidance, because once they do it, they really can't go back. And I think that's one of the challenges the SEC has, is there's just so much activity in the US that they have to make sure that once they put any clarity out there, that it does stand the test of time moving forward. And I think that's one of the big challenges that the SEC has.
They got to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Mason. I mean, they're afraid of putting something out there that harms investors, that backfires, and they've got a massive market with the world comes to the United States to invest and allocate assets, and they just don't want to screw it up. So, I mean, they've got people that will, ask the question, like, blockchain, in theory, obviates the need of it for a transfer agent, right? And then they want to know, really, what are all the things that a transfer agent actually does? Well, what happens if you go through a divorce and somebody and a judge puts a hold on your securities, right? How do you handle that in the blockchain? And there's this amazing body of law that's developed over decades and decades on the securities side that affords protections to people and corporate governance, and they want to make sure that they don't unwittingly shoot themselves in the foot vis-a-vis protecting investors. And so I suspect that pretty quickly here you're going to start to see more guidance. You saw the recent Jetway no action letter that declared that something was not a token. It was, I think, a little underwhelming to a lot of people, but they're moving. And I, just by virtue of what we're doing with our friends at INX, it appears that, that they've been pretty responsive and they're working through things, and we're getting down hopefully to the short strokes. But they are definitely looking at some of these filings as being precedent-setting, and they've got a lot of eyes on them. And when they start coming out, they will start, I think, adding clarity to this situation. So, I hear the need. Everybody wants to move along a little bit quicker, but this is core infrastructure ultimately for capital formation, and it's a paradigm shift, and I think you can expect that the regulators want to do it right. And I think smaller jurisdictions, just like smaller innovative companies, are willing to take risks that the big established incumbents shouldn't take. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs in the new product area have a long history of being fast followers and not pioneers, for exactly the liability reasons.
And I really mean this, because I don't understand. What is the risk? So if they what is the risk? What could go wrong?
You're seeing things like like if you look at the Ethereum Classic 51% assault, where somebody rewrote the ledger and stole a whole bunch of coins. When you look at some of these things, the way they're set up.
And again, that's tragic and that's bad. But when you were talking about risks, I thought you were talking about risks to our financial markets.
Well,
if we pass the wrong if we pass the wrong laws, and I don't understand what those risks are.
I mean, I think
investor confidence.
Yeah. I think that's what has made the American system so robust. But let's get off regulation for a moment. We've got folks that kind of have been in the layer one, not layer one. Sorry, wrong use. We have folks that have been involved with kind of the version one of the tech products in the space that are used widely by people. And now kind of everyone in the space that built a version 1.0 tech product is looking at how do we improve that? How do we build version 2.0, 3.0, whatever it is, right? So this question is directed more at Mason and Ami. What are you seeing, for yourselves, as well as in the market? What are some of the things that you're seeing that are coming in as like a version 2.0 of tech capabilities as opposed to kind of like the version 1.0 for STOs?
We were talking about investor confidence. I think one of the things that I realized with security tokens is that security tokens, one of the things that's true about them is that they move from one hand to the other. And I think that we've seen a situation where there's a problem with information being available to investors and being no asymmetric problem or failure. Because what happens is that the first person buying from the primary seller, okay, they can ask the primary seller whatever they want. Okay, but then the token starts moving. And the tokens in the environment today are not carrying the value with them. They're just a proxy, they're just a reference to the value. The value is sitting in documents, and these documents are sitting at the website of the issuer and so on and so forth. And then you have a token that starts moving, and it's very, very hard to know what's the value of this token if you're buying it. So I think one of the things that I'm working on is in the next generation to create a situation where a security token can carry its value inside it. So it will be sufficient and as a one unit. Okay, so when a token moves from one person to the other, not just the token move, but also its value, all the documents that define what the token holder rights are moves with it, so that anybody looking at the token can have all the information that the first buyer has, the 10th buyer will have as well, and the 100th buyer will have as well. And if we're going another step, it has to be verified by third parties as well. Because otherwise, we're going to have a problem, the same problem we have with ICO, where issuers can say whatever they want on the internet, and there's no... So I think these are actually the problems that the SEC is not seeing, because they're looking at the existing platform, existing infrastructure, where things don't move so much. Okay, and when things don't move so much, the problem is to make sure that the first issuer is saying the truth. But once you start understanding that tokens move from side to side, I think you will start seeing self-sufficient tokens, tokens that carry their value with them, in the same way that Bitcoin carries value with them, becoming a much more robust way of carrying value.
So you're working on that, obviously. Are other people working on something similar?
I think you guys have also done some work in capturing the value and connecting the value of a token to the token itself. We were just doing it, they're doing it at the application layer, and we're doing it at the base layer, the network layer. This is just one example of where I see, and in general, I would say that the next version of security token has to be institutional grade. What I just described, which is one example of how you make something institutional grade, something that bankers will feel happy to go with. And that may mean moving away from Ethereum, it may mean moving away from all sorts of remote, unsavory blockchain, and moving into things that these institutional investors can live with.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to, in this space, it's like once you build the technology, because we're so close to the protocol, we're so close to the blockchain, and the blockchain's immutable, it's very hard to reverse things. And so certain decisions, obviously, you may not want to make until you have 100% or very close to 100% certainty. And so for us, when I started the company, one of the things that I knew to be an objective truth was that the regulations wouldn't change. And so our architecture, we basically baked into not only money transmission laws, but as well as the securities laws, which we actually just learned at that time. And the reason was, once you architect your platform in a certain way, you probably don't want to change it, and you want to use the architecture to prevent you from making a lot of mistakes. And then other things that we thought would be true at that time was that the regulations or the interpretation of the regulations would change every few months. And we sort of saw that as the SEC came out and said this or that, the lawyers started shifting a little bit in terms of their strategy and how they were pushing these assets onto the market. So that was sort of another consideration that we took into place was, hey, these are the regulations today, but as these things shift, what are the things that are going to shift, and how can we make sure that we shift with them? So each one of our clients has unique compliance requirements and regulatory requirements. They may interpret things in different ways. They may want to have everyone go through a procedure that's very U.S.-centric and based on a very U.S. perspective, because that's where they want to be most protected. Or we have other clients that want to be protected in every jurisdiction that they're onboarding investors in. And so they may want to use us to automate the compliance when it comes to onboarding those investors. So I think that's one of the challenges in the blockchain space is once you make a decision, once you put your token out there, then you can't really change anything. So we use some tools like Knox Wallet, which was the first custody solution for digital securities, which we finally announced in January. And we use tools like ERC 1404 or Hyperledger or Corda to help enforce the regulatory requirements on the blockchain. But then what if the regulations change? What if we have a client that's launching under a private placement and wants to go public tomorrow? Those regulations are going to change, and the treatment of that token needs to change. So when we put tokens out there, it's a lot of those considerations that we take into place, and we do things like make the token upgradable through secure means, through cold storage, through Knox, and doing things like that. And so that's just one of the challenges. So it's like the things that you have near certainty on, you can do, but the things that you don't have certainty on, you want to make sure that you can account for later down the line through the technology.
You know, one of the things that I'm most excited about, you know, and the panel hasn't addressed this yet, is, you know, the fact that today the vast majority, and David probably even knows statistics on, but the vast majority of publicly traded U.S. stocks actually won't trade today, right? There's no liquidity in them. And you know, I think one of the things that these technologies can solve is liquidity, because it doesn't matter if you put out a security token if there's no market for it, if there's no liquidity. So things like, you know, early days, and I don't know whether this is 1.0 or 2.0 you were talking about, but you know, Bancor, just, you know, as an algorithmic market maker providing liquidity, I think is super interesting, and you know, I'm sure there are going to be future liquidity, you know, technologies that we're going to see.
Yeah, let me. You know, this is kind of interesting, right? You know, obviously there's a lot of commentary about how things are in flux. You know, regulations could change, technology could change. You know, what about, let's talk about standards really quick, right? You know, standards that bring people together. Do we need standards now? Is it too early to have standards, or you know, or what is it? Like, how do you guys feel about it? I know you've got kind of 1404. You know, Securities has a the DS standard. How useful are standards in our ecosystem today? Or you know, some people think it's too early for them.
Yeah. So when we had to enforce compliance requirements on tokens for our clients, it really came down to a regulatory need. And you know, once these tokens are out there, there are other types of institutions and companies that interface with them. For us, it was more about solving a problem, but again, we were afraid that it was too early for a standard. So with the ERC 1404, we made it such that you can actually implement other standards with it, like Harbor's R token or the DS standard. And so we sort of took the perspective of we don't know, which you'll hear a lot from me. And so we made something that was configurable for every client. So every client has unique compliance needs, so we could do that with it. If they want this standard or that standard, we're really agnostic to it. And so we built 1404 as an open source standard, non-branded. You probably won't know it's associated with us. And so, yeah, we sort of took the perspective that it's a little too early and the market's not large enough.
Tommy, comments?
I think that there is a need for a standard because there's so many exchanges and so many issuers, and tokens are supposed to be work and move everywhere. The reality is that when the first exchanges start implementing something, they need something to implement. So something like the DS protocol was written very quickly, very early to solve real-world problems. So I don't see this market as a market where some smart people sit around on the side and design like a theoretical protocol and then deploy it into the market like you sometimes get in communication and things like that. This is a market where the early movers will create a standard by just writing code, deploying it with 10 exchanges, and suddenly that's a standard.
Yep.
And I think one thing that people aren't really talking about in terms of standards is there's standards on certain blockchains. So Ethereum has, I think, 4 or 5 different major standards for these security tokens. I think what's a bigger problem is people issuing these securities on different blockchains. Right? Obviously, that's a much bigger problem when it comes to interoperability than the standard itself. Standard's a very minor change. It's very easy to integrate these different things, but when people are building things on different blockchains now, that's entire core infrastructure that they have to build from the ground up and then integrate into their existing products, and they have to set up the nodes, monitor the nodes, make sure there's uptime, and that's a much larger, I think, undertaking than integrating these different standards on the same blockchain.
Yeah, to give you kind of some perspective that I've seen through my work with T0. While I head up the issuance department there, I've been very active in kind of helping their tokenization team and their trading team. And the reality is, when you have hundreds of issuers coming to you saying, "Oh, we'd like you to trade or work with our tokens," and they've all designed their tokens their own way. The diligence process to go through each one of them over and over again, it's just not practical at some point. Like, we haven't gotten to a point where everyone has kind of built off a common base that's really easy to integrate, without a investment in resources and time. So I think kind of from what I see within T0 is, if you came to Pro Securities, which is the operator of the ATS that's affiliated with T0, if you're not kind of using the T0 standard, if you're not using like DS, or you're not using ST20 or something like that, it's just it's a lengthier process to kind of get diligenced and onboarded on. And for me, that's why, even though I think it's too early for standards, at the same time, we kind of need them a little bit. I think we're just coming short on time, so I want to thank Mason, David, Ami, and Lou. Thank you for kind of all your comments. I hope you guys appreciated format in kind of giving you, our idea of what the state of digital securities in 2019 would look like through this discussion.